Now, this is something we all need to be extremely concerned about, guys. If you watched my video earlier this afternoon on the whole idea of the Big 12 and the Pac-12 merging into one, I said I was going to do a part 2, the same article. We're talking about a potential exclusive playoff between the SEC and the Big 10. Now, I'm assuming the only way this happens is if both of these conferences turn into super conferences, meaning Notre Dame goes to the Big 10 and whatever other schools they add. Originally, we thought it was going to be Oregon and Washington. Now it might be North Carolina, Virginia, and Duke, but whichever other teams they add, they go to 20 teams. Maybe they go to 24 teams. They take some teams from the Pac-12. They take some teams from the ACC. And then you would have the SEC expanding their conference, not just with Texas and Oklahoma, but expanding it to 20 teams, taking the superpowers in the ACC, the Clemsons, the FSUs, the Miamis, from the ACC, and these two possibly forming an exclusive playoff, which, I'm sure most people, me included, do not like super conferences. The only reason these super conferences has formed is due to revenue. I mean, they make absolutely no sense in terms of their geographical location, in terms of the overall health of the sport. The only reason USC is in the Big 10 and is in the same conference as Rutgers is because they're getting paid 3 times more in the TV deal when it gets announced in 2024. They will at least be making 3 times the amount they were gonna make in their Pac-12 TV deal. So it's all about money. And this is like the next step. Not only do we have to deal with super conferences, but we have to deal with some sort of exclusive playoff that would restrict a team like Washington from being in the playoff and Washington's ability to be a national champion. Oregon, I'm not saying these teams are going to win the national championship, but this idea like we're going to restrict some of these Power 5 teams is ridiculous. The Power 2. As mentioned last Thursday, the 32 combined teams in the Big 10 and the SEC could stage a credible playoff on their own when they have their final, for now, configurations both settled by in 2025. Media rights insiders who recently spoke with CBS Sports added some depth that suggests the idea has not only been considered, but is perhaps a big reason the Big Ten made its bold move. And this is the format for the so-called exclusive playoff. Take the top 4 finishers from each conferences, so the top 4 finishers from the SEC and the Big Ten, and seed them in an 8-team field. So this would be an 8-team playoff that would be exclusive to 2 conferences, possibly 2 super conferences. Quarterfinals and semifinals are played in bowl games as proposed in last year's 12-team playoff bracket. Using the first 8 years of the college football playoff as a reference, only 5 teams who qualified to the field would not get a chance to return: Cincinnati, Clemson, Florida State, Notre Dame, and Washington. If Clemson and FSU were to join the SEC, and if Notre Dame wants to join the Big Ten, only Cincinnati and Washington would be the outliers. Would there even be much pushback? So guys, this is a very, very scary thought. And would there be much push? There would certainly be pushback from me. I'll tell you that much right now. Certainly from me. I think I can deal with the super conferences. Number one, the idea that USC is in the Big Ten is ridiculous. But it's here, it's happening, we have to deal with it. The best case scenario for us is Big Ten stays at 16 teams. SEC stays where they are. No one adds anything. And maybe the Big 12 can try and get better. Maybe the Pac-12 can try and stay afloat. It would be great if the ACC added Notre Dame, but it would make no sense. Notre Dame is better off being an independent than being in the ACC. That's how bad their revenue deal is. So I think the best case scenario is we stay put even though there's two conferences at this point due to the realignment that are so much better than everyone else, if we're able to get an expanded playoff to 12 teams in 2025, the best case scenario is we stay put. If it does get expanded to super conferences and you have three super conferences, one being the Big Ten, one being the SEC, and then the other being either the Pac-12 or the Big 12, maybe they merge. I talked about that in my last video. Just some concoction of a merged Big 12, Pac-12 as a third super conference. I would still love, a 12-team playoff in that case. I would be okay with it, even though you would have these ridiculous super conferences with 10-team divisions, or maybe even worse if it got to 24-team super conferences. But this idea that we're just going to wall off certain teams. And I also, guys, the other thing is I hate the 8-team playoff. I just hate the idea, the format. It's so stupid to me. So I'm guessing the seeding would be 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, and 4 versus 5. I view that as completely inorganic. I think if you're going to expand the playoff, a much better way to go is the 12-team format, where the first 4 teams all get byes, and the first round is on-campus games, and it's 5v12, 6v11, 7v10, 8v9, and the winners of those games face the top 4 seeds in more on-campus games, and then the 2 semifinal games are neutral site, and then the national championship is neutral site. That is a far better model. Restricting teams from possibly... And again, this article does a good job because the only teams that would have been restricted from competing in this, if Clemson, Florida State join an expanded SEC, and if Notre Dame joins an expanded Big Ten, the only teams that would be restricted that already got in are Washington and Cincinnati. That would be it. Every other team that has been to the playoffs would be located in those 2 super conferences if the Big Ten gets Notre Dame and if the SEC gets FSU and Clemson. So that's the whole idea. Would there even be that much pushback? Guys, this was never how college football was supposed to work. We've already had enough issues with these 2 super conferences. The worst thing that could happen is this exclusive college football playoff. And then what would happen to all the other teams? Oregon wouldn't be able to compete for a national title. Oregon University, Washington, California, all the teams in the Big 12. It's just so ridiculous. And I guess those teams would have their own playoff, their own bowl season. So hopefully this doesn't happen. It seems like it's speculation, but just going back to what they were saying, apparently part of the Big Ten's motivation for adding USC and UCLA was to possibly implement an exclusive playoff format like this, where the only teams that can win a national title every single year would be in the Big Ten and the SEC, which I would imagine would be 2 super conferences. If this is the way you're going to do it, you have to add Notre Dame. They have to have a chance to win the national title every year. You have to add Clemson, obviously. You can't have 2 different national titles where you've got Oregon and Clemson competing for one with all the Pac-12 teams and all the Big 12 teams, and then an exclusive national title between the SEC and the Big Ten. This whole thing is ridiculous. This argument, the 8-team playoff, is I am all for the expanded playoff. I was never for an 8-team playoff. The seeding makes no sense. 1v8 makes no sense to me. The idea of the 12-team playoff was to still give an incentive to get a top 4 seed, so you get an auto bye. And it gives more seeds so more teams have a chance. So we could see Washington in the playoff. We could see Oregon in the playoff. We could see Utah. Could you imagine if we had a 12-team playoff this year? And then people get angry at that because they're afraid of change, when in reality, it wouldn't change much at all. If you're still a top 4 seed, you're auto-advancing to at least the quarterfinals, and you get to host the quarterfinal game on campus. which would be amazing for the sport overall. And that just, if they're really concerned about revenue and ratings, you need to make the games at the end of the season matter. This whole idea like, oh, Ohio State versus USC, Michigan versus UCLA, let's nuke every conference so we get all these big matchups and we get more TV ratings. Why not just make a 12-team playoff? So instead of players literally sitting out of New Year's Six games like Kenny Pickett, because they don't matter, make every New Year's Six game matter. And if you had the 12-team playoff, every single New Year's Six game would matter. So guys, this is a horrible, horrible thing. Do I think this would actually happen? I know the article is saying, they're hinting that this could happen. Guys, there is no way. These rumors need to be put to bed. I know the article, it makes it seem optimistic that this could happen, and I'm not saying I'm an insider or anything like that. I just think there's no way college football would go that far, even if they made the two super conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC, with Notre Dame added to the Big Ten, with Clemson added to the SEC, which very likely could happen. Would they really restrict and make the playoff exclusive, which would exclude Baylor, which would exclude Oregon? Unless Oregon joined the Big Ten, I don't know. But you can't be excluding these teams. It's ridiculous, guys. The day and age of the Super Conference is upon us. The big news right now, we're still waiting for Notre Dame's decision. What are they going to do if they join the Big Ten? The Big Ten will then have an option between adding either Washington and Oregon or going to the ACC, which at that point they would look at teams like North Carolina, Duke, and Virginia, in my opinion. That's what the Big Ten would do if they're able to add, Notre Dame. And then you would have the SEC follow that up by trying to get FSU, Clemson, Miami, teams like that, and that would bring their conference up to around 20 teams, the Big Ten up to around 20 teams, and then you would have kind of a cat fight between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. But again, it almost seems way more, it makes way more sense if those teams just came together, merged the best teams, and created their own 20-team mega conference with the best teams from the Pac-12 and the best teams from the Big 12 together in the event that Oregon and Washington are not accepted to the Big Ten. If Oregon and Washington do go to the Big Ten, I think the Pac-12 dissolves at that point. In that scenario, the Pac-12 would dissolve and the Big 12 would pick off the teams from the Pac-12. The assumption being the teams that would go from the Pac-12 to the Big 12 would be Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. That is the rumor I've heard. I don't know how true it is, but those would be the teams, and they would join a massive Big 12, where the Big 12 would get 4 teams from the Pac-12, and then 4 teams possibly from the ACC, and they would be the third super conference. So it all depends. Does the Big 10 accept Oregon and Washington? And then after all of this is settled, do they seriously consider making an exclusive playoff where it's only the Big Ten Super Conference and only the SEC Super Conference allowed to be a national champion, and they make their own 8-team playoff? It's a disturbing thought. And these people, oh my God, if you really want more money, make a freaking 12-team. It's so obvious. How dumb are these people? It is so obvious. Kenny Pickett doesn't even play in one of your New Year's Six games. That's a premier game of the bowl season. It's a New Year's Six game. It's the Peach Bowl. And Kenny Pickett doesn't play. Kenneth Walker doesn't play. Oh, gee, I wonder how we can make those games important. No, you know what? Let's just have 2 teams from California join the Big Ten. Yay! It makes so much sense. Now it makes sense. And let's make an exclusive playoff. Oh, no. Ladies and gentlemen, it is unfortunate. I hope everyone's having a happy 4th of July. It's been a tough one. Stay safe. Enjoy the fireworks, guys. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.